Hello, writers. My name is Tennyson E. Stead. I am a working screenwriter and a working script doctor, and welcome to The Right Stuff. I know that a lot of writers want to talk about the business side of film, and we're going to make a couple of videos on that subject. Anybody who's not aware, when I first moved to Hollywood, I ended up getting a low-level executive job in film finance. And I ended up building a career in finance and film development that lasted about 10 years. And some amazing things happened during that time, and I also saw some really shady stuff. And in the balance, I learned a ton about what works in Hollywood and what doesn't. And in my opinion, I have a pretty clear grasp of where Hollywood's sustainability problems are coming from. So, as we talk about the realities of the film industry today, we're going to be talking about, how people make money in film today and how films actually do get financed, but we're also going to talk about where that's not working and how people who want to have a sustainable career into the future need to be looking for that sustainability. To start this whole conversation off, I want to talk about kind of a baseline picture of how film finance has come to be what it is right now and kind of what's happening in Hollywood financially. And this story starts in the early 90s, actually with a very specific movie, with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which was the first film to be pre-sold at foreign markets. So for anybody who doesn't know what pre-sales is, it's a system, or was a system, by which a movie can make money before the movie is made, and that money can be used to produce the film. Okay? It's a system for debt financing in Hollywood, and prior to this, there had never been any debt financing for Hollywood, and kind of the whole banking world and the whole film finance world was on fire and very excited by the possibility of bringing institutional capital into Hollywood. Prior to pre-sales, basically you had to make an investment in a movie. You would decide for yourself whether or not the production team and the project had financial merit, and you would put your money at risk, and you wouldn't be able to make money off of that investment until the movie made money. You would hand the money to a producer and they would spend it on actors and sets and all the things that the movie needs, and those things are not liquid. You can't sell them at the stock market, so you have to sit there and wait for the movie to generate ticket sales and generate DVD and Blu-ray sales and whatever else is going on in order to pay you out. Licensing fees from foreign markets when the movie goes to market, and all these different revenue streams would be the money that got you out of the investment. That makes sense as a business model for film, because film is inherently high risk. There's basically fundamentally two things that can go wrong with a movie. Okay? There's a lot of risk factors. If you read, an offering memorandum or anything like that, they're going to come up with a laundry list of hundreds of things that can go wrong with the movie, and that's an important list to read. It's important that you break things down to that level, because you're liable for each and every one of those things, but they really fall into two categories. The first is the film could suck. If the film sucks, you have a problem. People aren't going to like watching it, and you're not going to make as much money. The other thing that can happen is that people might not show up. I know these sound like basic problems, but they are the fundamental problems. If people don't show up, it doesn't matter if the film sucks or not. You're still not going to make money. But if people are showing up, and if the film is good, you don't have any problems. People keep showing up because the film is good. People want to see your next film because the film is good. And your business grows and flourishes. Apart from the occasional act of God, but at that point, you really have controlled all the things that you can control. Okay? So, the things that make the film industry succeed, fundamentally, as we've talked about before, are strength in your craft and strength in your community, because strength in your craft is what keeps the film good, and strength in your community is what keeps people showing up. And just so we're clear, showing up doesn't mean just showing up at the box office. If you need to build a set, nobody shows up. You don't get it. You don't have a set. Showing up is an integral part of success in film. But if those two things are always happening, you fail upwards. Everything's working. Okay? The financing should account for that. If you're making money before anyone knows if the film's good or if people are showing up to it, and if that's your primary means of making money, then there isn't a lot of incentive to keep the film good or to keep people showing up, because all your problems are solved before those things become an issue. Systemically, it's not a great way to run the film industry. And in the 90s, what sales agents at the festival started doing was collecting IOUs from distributors for movies. Promissory notes, basically, memos, deal memos, saying, if you deliver a film with these actors in this budget range, in this genre, I will give you X number of dollars in licensing fees. And the insane thing that happened is that someone took this like a binder full of promissory notes collected from all the different, territories at Cannes and Berlinale. Some distributor in England, some distributor in France, some distributor in Germany, right? Everybody's offering a certain amount of money in exchange for sex, lies, and videotape once it's finished, provided you give us the top 4 actors, you give us the budget, you give us the genre, we will pay you that money. They took those documents to a bank and took out a loan. Now, those documents are not debt. They're not even really legally binding. If you have a deal memo from a distributor in Azerbaijan, and the deal memo says, if you give me a movie with George Clooney and Julia Roberts and so on and so forth for $10 million, I'm going to give you $100,000 to be able to distribute it in Azerbaijan. If you have that deal memo, and then a year and a half later you come back and you give them a print of the movie, and they don't give you the $100,000, then you have to sue that person in the Azerbaijani court system, which you probably don't even want to spend. $100,000 isn't a lot of money in the first place. So that's not a huge... That deal memo that you're getting isn't the kind of thing that you would expect an American bank to issue a loan on. But they did, and they started doing it systemically. This is where the importance of attachments came from. Okay? Because all of a sudden, unless it was a really huge studio movie, this became the primary revenue driver. We have to take a step back and understand where this sort of pre-sales money came from. Strength in craft and strength in community is always kind of what's driven show business. And prior to that, you had stars like George Clooney and Julia Roberts and Brad Pitt making heavy investments and putting a lot of time into Cannes and Berlinale and getting to know the distributors and the people around, making sure their community is strong so that their films perform in foreign markets and they get distributed in foreign markets. They were taking it personally that the relationships that drove the success of their films were strong. Okay? But once people started getting paid out for the movies before the work of distributing the movie even started, they stopped doing that work. So the next generation of Hollywood stars, people like Sam Worthington, for example, never had to do that big foreign glad-handing push every year. They didn't buy houses in France so they could be closer to Cannes, that next generation of actors. And as a result, the pre-sales market wasn't as strong as it was. The relationships that built the pre-sales market weren't as strong as they were. And the pre-sales market started to dry up. And, foreign distributors started offering less and less and less. And originally it was the case where you could take a movie overseas and you could cough up maybe 120% of your budget. And now, today, you're probably not getting more than 20%. You can't finance a movie in pre-sales anymore. But a loan is a conservative investment especially compared to an illiquid investment like putting money in a film and just accepting that you could lose it. Okay? Once an industry becomes more conservative, or at least once an industrial institution becomes more conservative, it can't go back the other way. You can't rewind the clock. Once people get used to safe money, you can't get them to re-accept the risk. which means Hollywood had invested in an unsustainable exit strategy. And now that that unsustainability is revealing itself, there's no way to go back to the sustainability. We have to find other institutional capital, other ways to take out loans. So we got into the tax incentives. Georgia offered some pretty big tax incentives for Hollywood to come do business there. And a decent portion of Hollywood has actually relocated to Georgia. And then New Orleans did it, and then Canada did it, and all these other territories and countries, Croatia, all these places. Germany had an insane loophole for a minute or two that they were just bleeding money into Hollywood. And by, these institutions began to realize that Hollywood is not actually going to move on their account. The fact that Louisiana is pouring money into Hollywood isn't going to make Hollywood move to New Orleans. It's not. And the minute they figured that out, and the minute they figured that they weren't actually buying our business in any kind of permanent way, they were basically just paying our expenses, they closed up shop because it wasn't sustainable. Okay, so the tax incentives, for a minute there, closed the gap between the money that you were no longer making in pre-sales and that 110, 120% that a bank wants to see on their money in order to justify the loan. But now, pre-sales plus the tax incentives is still only going to be 30, 40% of your budget. None of these debt-based finance methods are sustainable. And Hollywood, in its efforts to hang on to that institutional capital and keep financing movies through debt, has become more and more desperate over time, and they've accepted more and more dangerous or unsustainable deal structures to make that happen. To the point where now, today, there is a considerable amount of Chinese money in the Hollywood infrastructure. And what American institutions need to remember is that when you're doing business with a Chinese corporation and they're investing in Hollywood's movies, and they're investing, not in order to see a financial return on investment, but just in order to promote Chinese talent and or storytelling, however they're framing that, we have to remember that there is no such thing as a Chinese corporation. China is a closed communist system. If there is a Chinese film company, that Chinese film company is owned by the Chinese government. And that, I'm not saying that is good or bad, but it's a fact. Which means if you're taking investment capital from a Chinese film company, you're taking money from the Chinese government. And if you're getting notes from the film company, well, here's what we need. We need Chinese actors. Okay, fine, Chinese actors. Well, that makes sense. And these ideas don't really work for Chinese markets. Well, that's okay. You're a Chinese company. I understand wanting your film to perform in Chinese markets. And we need a Chinese protagonist to take down an American high-ranking government official in the story for the sake of the American people, so the American people can see that the Chinese people have their interests at heart more than their own politicians. Now, hold on a second. Where do you think this note is coming from? Why do you think this is happening? And unfortunately, business in Hollywood is consistently so desperate and so eager to make things work that people won't stop and question the motives of the people who are cutting checks. They'll accept it and they'll move forward with it and they'll rationalize it. But at that point, what you're making is, for better or for worse, Chinese propaganda. And it's important to know that that's illegal in this country. And these are the kinds of things that even big productions get caught up in. because of the sustainability of the Hollywood finance model and our reliance on debt financing. This is where we've come to because the film industry has gotten very used to a level of risk in its financing that it cannot support through its fundamentals. This is what we get for getting away from what if the show sucks? What if, nobody shows up? If we consistently focus on building strong community and building strong craft, then we get to be selective about where our money comes from because our business is sustainable. But if we're constantly worrying about the impending collapse and we're constantly trying to prop up our house in the face of that impending collapse, then there does come a point where decades of propping and decades of infrastructure just kind of keeping this thing on its feet starts collapsing on itself and creating its own kind of problems. And whether we're talking about Chinese money, whether we're talking about Russian money, whether we're talking about money from the United Arab Emirates, the important thing to understand is that right now Hollywood's business model is divorced enough from its fundamentals that we are making deals that we don't understand. And we're making deals with people who do not have the best interests of the audience and the show at heart. And I'm not saying that's always the case. And at the same time, what I am saying is that institutionally speaking, those deals have become part of how Hollywood understands its business. And that is so dangerous. And that's a big part of how Hollywood has become vulnerable to constant buyouts and whole new industries just hijacking our infrastructure. When you look at how the tech companies, through institutions like Netflix and Apple and Amazon, have come in and essentially bought all of Hollywood's high-end intellectual property, except for those properties which are owned by Disney, and we'll see how long Disney holds out. It's because we've been making decisions, financially speaking, that are not in the best interests of the industry, the content, the audience, or the people who work here. And when I drive home the point that we need to focus on strengthen our community and strengthen our craft and build those things deliberately and from the ground up, that's because I don't expect that we're going to be able to inherit them from previous generations of show people. We do have to build it from the ground up. And it's okay to make money and work in the existing system in the meantime, but do not expect that system to be here for you in the future, because I don't see how it can last. That's the broadest reality that I can paint about Hollywood finances today. And I think it's just as relevant to screenwriters as it is to anybody else who works in the industry, especially since inevitably a lot of screenwriters become producers in order to see their content produced. These are the things I want you thinking about as you arrive at a business model for those productions. So, thank you very much for watching. If you like the work that we're doing here on The Right Stuff, please be sure to like and subscribe. Happy holidays. Happy New Year, everybody. Good luck to us all in 2026. And I will see you next week. I look forward to learning with you.